Well, it's still the same good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are coming in from. Thank you, Prof. During the introduction, Prof said something about supply chain changing. The first thing to talk about is actually how important is supply chain. It's critical. Competitiveness of nations, how nations' economy works, how companies succeed. Once your opponent or competitor is able to manage his supply chain better than your own, he gets a competitive advantage. That's a general, but let me share my slide. All right, so from what Professor Ambe said, the supply chain that we designed before that worked is no longer working right now. So we have to look at how do we design a trade-ready supply chain. We have supply chains across everywhere, but is your supply chain trade-ready? And not just being trade-ready, it's also in a sanctions-sensitive environment. When your country is not sanctioned, you can say it doesn't concern you, but the issue is that you will be affected in a lot of ways through your suppliers and other partners in business. So let's go. I have already mentioned how important supply chain is to every nation and every organization. In fact, we say, I belong to the school of thought that says that the success of African continental free trade area will depend on logistics and supply chain. Now, why does this matter now? Reason number one, intensifying global sanctions and export controls from America, from EU, from UK, and Asian regulators. Because in the international trade, you obey the laws of your own country. You also obey the laws of the country to which you are importing or exporting. So this is one of the reasons why it's important. The laws are made elsewhere, but you are affected. Then the other thing is rising regulatory scrutiny on cross-border trade. Now you have AI-driven customs screening, advanced cargo data requirement, and a whole lot of other things. So this is why your supply chain has to be trade-ready. Africa's expanding role in global supply chains. Ordinarily, Africa is about 20% of the world population, but Africa's contribution to global trade is put at between 5 and 6%. And yet we have almost all the natural resources in Africa. Something is wrong. The culprit is supply chain. So, and for Africa to play a greater role in African global supply chain, we have to do something about it. After implementation, it will increase intra-African trade. Of course, we know the history behind intra-African trade. Today, it's put at between 12 and 15%. In Asia, it's about 50. Europe is about 60. So it means we have a long way to go. Geopolitical volatility disrupting traditional routes. We all are familiar with the story about the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, there's an article, I think, on LinkedIn today. The person said that where ships decide nations. So the volatility seems to have come to stay. So the earlier we redesign our supply chain, the better. Now, sanctions, when we say sanction-sensitive environment, for you to have a sanction-sensitive supply chain, there are things you look at. First one, trade partners may be targeted or indirectly targeted. If a bomb drops on the factory of your supplier, you have a problem. If another country sanctions the nation of your supplier, you could be affected. You remember what happened with Trumpism. First of all, he had a tariff for some nations, then he had another tariff for nations who are dealing with nations that are under sanction. So these are the kind of things we should be looking at. Banks enforce strict money laundering and KYC and transaction screening. So if your supply chain is not sensitive, you are going to have a problem with banks. There are export controls which apply to specific technologies or materials. You have to build all of that into your supply chain. Then documentation, origin, and end-use verification are also critical. The rules of origin apply in every bilateral agreement, even continental one, which we have in Africa. And then documentation is the key. Documentation is the key. If you have not documented, even if you document it and you can't retrieve it, you are lying, because the other party cannot accept. So now let's look at strategic supply chain configuration for this sanction-sensitive environment we're talking about. First of all, it has to be modular. Modular in the sense that you can switch markets, you can switch suppliers, you can switch routes without rebuilding your entire supply chain. That's the first thing that you have to do. The second one is that redundancy. Redundancy can be seen as waste of resources and the rest of them, but there are circumstances where it is something that you must do. Multiply pre-qualified suppliers, parallel logistics lanes, and backup banking corridors. If you depend only in one source, the question is actually how quickly can you switch from your main source of supply to others in 30 days? If you're not able to answer that question, there's a problem. Then transparency. Full tier 1 to 3 visibility. Some companies have suppliers first tier, second tier, and third tier. So if you have only visibility of the first tier, you have a problem. You have to have visibility through the 3 of them. You must be able to trace every component, input, and financial flow to its origin, or else you start answering questions of what you do not know. Then data-driven, automated compliance checks embedded into procurement, logistics, and payment workflows will save you a whole lot of problems. Right now, we have automated compliance technologies that can help. Then regulator ready. Is your company ready for the regulator to walk in and audit you? Audit-proof documentation, pre-validated export classifications, beneficial ownership records. All these things are very, very important. So strategic supply chain configuration is MRTDRR. That is to say, modular, redundant, transparent, data-driven, and regulator-ready. Let's move to designing the right configurations, the things that you must have. Cross-border screening of your partners. You have to ensure that that happens. Dual route logistics planning. This is not easy. When vessels are unable to enter the Suez Canal, the only option is to come down to the Cape of Good Hope. And the implications financially is very, very heavy, from insurance to fuel and everything. Second one here is dual routing logistics plan. Regional sourcing option. During COVID, so many companies suffered as a result of the concentration of their suppliers being in China. After that, I think companies learned that dual sourcing is the way to go. And I think it is also becoming very, very important at this point in time. Then, of course, counterparty and transaction monitoring. Screen at onboarding is not enough. If a supplier supplies you 350 times, you should check the supplier 350 times. That's why the customs say, in God we trust. Everyone else we investigate. You should just behave like the customs here. Export controls. We do not have too much of export controls in Africa. I think we are yet to export enough. So but African firms need to watch certain things that are happening in the export control world. There's what they call the dual use materials, products with both civilian and material application, chemicals and industrial inputs, then technology transfers. I had a situation when I was approached to find out what can be done. The Navy wanted to take the engine of one of the vessels out of the country. Of course, it is to repair it and bring it back to Nigeria. So you need carnet for such transactions. So high-risk regions and sensitive entities, you need to watch very, very closely to those ones. Then end-use certification and documentation integrity must be obtained, stored, and periodically renewed for all controlled export. The key word there is controlled export, because I know that even in African nations, there are certain exports that you cannot make unless you obtain certain approvals and licenses. All right. African Continental Free Trade Area in a global compliance environment. There is the rules of origin rigor, coexistence of national, regional, and global regulations. The thing about compliance is that after needs compliance, just as much as the global market needs, there's no lowering down compliance level because it is an African transaction. It's all at the same level. Issues of tariff preferences, documentation accuracy, it is the same thing globally. Custom modernization and digital transparency. These are all the things that AFTA need to do to ensure that things work, because it's keyed into the global value chain. Then institutional readiness for cross-border scrutiny, clear governance for trade compliance. I happen to have taken so many companies, I've run training for so many companies in terms of trade compliance. And it's very funny how unserious people take it until you face the consequences. So clear governance for trade compliance you have. You have to have policy and SOP aligned with international regimes, all those issues that you have to comply to. Then skilled compliance officers. You have to train officers. At times, the presence of evidence of compliance by a company can save a company when issues are taken to court. When a company says, I have a compliance manual, here is my compliance officer, definitely the judge will put all that into consideration before meting out penalties. Technology for screening, monitoring, and reporting. You have to have that. Escalation protocols for high-risk transactions. In fact, some high-risk areas are treated as critical control points that you have to have people who are looking at that very particular point every time. If by the time you get this slide, each of the things that have been discussed, if you look on the right side, you will find very useful information about it. Compliance by design. Compliance doesn't just happen. You must design it into the entire supply chain. You will design it into procurement. You will design it into production. You will design it into logistics. You will design it into finance and also documentation. Because at every point that we have mentioned, non-compliance has consequences. I don't have time to go into taking all the procurement, production, logistics, and the rest of them one by one. But the fact is that whichever section of the supply chain you belong, take a look at it, and you can always identify areas of compliance that must happen. So if you want to have a trade-ready supply chain, you must build in compliance by design, not by accident, not when it happens. I'm trying to round up. Building resilience to geopolitical volatility. Now that we said that geopolitical volatility seems to have come to stay, so what do? To build resilience, alternative sourcing basis you have to create, real-time risk intelligence, then strong regional partnership under AFTA. In fact, one thing what is happening geopolitically will do for AFTA is that it gives room for stronger partnerships and relationships along the African Continental Free Trade Area. Then flexible routing and shipping reconfiguration. This is not an easy one because you don't own ships, but the fact is that something can always be done about it. Inventory buffers for critical inputs. Yes, if you know that the environment internationally is challenging, you have to build buffers for your very critical inputs. Tools and enablers for trade-ready supply chain, digital compliance, AI-enabled sanction screening, supplier risk scoring. This is very important. This supplier risk scoring, AI will score the supplier, including everything ESG, just give you a report that will, with which you can take a decision. Pre-clearance partnerships with customs, end-to-end traceability systems, then of course scenario modeling and stress testing. These are all the things that, the tools that you must use. So I'm going to end with these questions. Executive question that should guide action. Every executive in supply chain, particularly those at executive level, heads of supply chain or heads of different aspects of supply chain, where are our sanction-sensitive nodes? Do you know where they are? Can you name the specific suppliers, corridors, and counterparts carrying elevated exposure? This is very important. Secondly, how many suppliers can we switch to within 30 days? That's where the redundancy comes in. They are not doing anything. You probably will be paying them something to keep them. But the fact is that when the push comes to shove, then you will see what role they are playing. Are all cross-border partners fully screened? Not just at onboarding stage, continuously. Do we have real-time visibility of our supply flows, complete visibility? Is our documentation strong enough for regulatory audit? Are you ready for regulatory bodies to come in at every point in time to look at what you are doing? So every board member and senior leader should be able to answer these questions clearly, immediately, and with evidence. So the 2026 compliance mandates: resilient by design, transparent end-to-end, digitally enabled, aligned with African Continental Free Trade Agreement, ready for regulatory screening at any point in time. Compliance is no longer a function, it is strategic capability. I think I want to end it here, and thank you very much for the time. I hope it was useful. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing.